everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tea with HRT, where we talk about the people side of business and the leadership challenges that come along with it. I'm Brenda, the Director of Marketing here at HR Transformed, and I'm joined by our founder and CEO, Eileen.
Hi, Brenda. Hi, everyone. And hi, Jenica, our guest. April is Neurodiversity Awareness Month. And so today we're talking about neurodiversity in the workplace and what that looks like in practice, not only for leaders, for HR teams as well. And so we're excited to have you here, Jenica Norris. Welcome to Tea with HRT.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we jump in, I'd love to kind of start with a little bit of context. Can you share a little bit about your background and the work that you're focused on today?
Yeah, so a little bit about my background is I was a former Microsoftie, spent 12 years in ops in business management, decided that one of the gaps that I saw in not only the tech industry, but also in general, is that there wasn't a lot of support or guidance for coaching or consulting for people that have ADHD, that are on the spectrum or are neurodivergent. And so I've been in business for a little over a year now, and I love what I do. I mainly work with people that are more service-based. I do have a couple of clients that are brick and mortar founders, but for the most part, I really enjoy getting to really help people and build systems that their brains actually work with and actually provide them business assistance that isn't just general business advice.
So, for leaders or HR teams who may be newer to this conversation, how would you define neurodiversity in the context of today's workplace? And why is it something that organizations should be paying more attention to?
With a lot of the research that has come out, especially in the past 10, 15 years, we are a lot more aware of how many people actually are neurodivergent. It's not just something that is a hot topic, something that is going to go away. We do have to adapt. We have to be very resilient when it comes to that adaptation. But at the same time, too, we really have to understand that every person's experience, their education, where they come from, is going to be different. So we definitely have to be aware. We have to be flexible, but also understanding that one of the biggest pillars is communication. If for whatever reason, an employee is not as willing to be open about that conversation, we kind of really tell them to say, hey, write it down on a piece of paper of how you're feeling, and then really process those feelings, emotions, behaviors. Because otherwise, if you're not really self-reflecting on yourself before you have these conversations with other people, it makes it a lot more difficult for people to really understand what you're going through and how to navigate that. And especially as someone that is neurodivergent, going from the corporate space to my own business has definitely been a very big learning experience for me. But I also think, especially in the HR space, we also have to be aware of how we talk about it. But being open, being honest, and having that dialogue, I think can continue to really bring on, other perspectives, other interesting systems that can be provided to the workplace. But I think definitely just going back to being honest about it, because people don't know what you're going through. And so if they're not up to speed, it makes it a lot more difficult for people to fully support you in the best way possible.
I 100% agree. That conversation's happening more and more day to day with just employees and their managers, and managers aren't taking that information and pushing it through to HR. And if they don't have HR, to leadership, and understanding how to sort of manage the conversation, how to address sort of some of these requests that are coming about of like, I can work better, I can feel better supported if, when those conversations are happening, they're happening more and more, and either they're happening in small silos and not having a bigger sort of discussion at the table, so that some of these solutions can be handed out globally to everyone, and providing those resources. Because when you have that one person who wants to speak up and say something, there's all this fear attached to it, right? There's all this like, well, what are they going to say? Or are they going to look at me differently? Or am I going to have a stigma attached? But the more that people can um, the more that people can talk about it, and the more that they can share very concrete ways of being supported, the better it would be.
From just having the conversations, and especially as someone that has spent a lot of time learning about leadership and what that looks like, I
Mm.
totally agree with the conversation of like going from manager to direct report and then them not disseminating that information. And I think it's super important, because if we don't have those conversations, if we're not actually providing the HR team, the executive team, that sort of information, I feel like that only inhibits that person's ability to better do their job.
Right.
And I think it's really difficult sometimes to have those conversations, especially if you don't feel supported by your manager, by your peers, and other people that are in your ecosystem. But like you said, I think having those conversations is far more important and outweighs the shame, the guilt, all of those feelings. Because in that way, we feel heard. We feel like we're actually being supported and actually listened to, instead of continuing that shame spiral of, oh my God, I didn't do this correctly, I'm gonna get fired. It's like, no, there are other ways to sit and have those conversations that aren't going to be negative, but we also have to think about the language that we're also using in those conversations as well.
Right. And you said something really important just now. You said we want to do our job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's important. It's like that sort of understanding of it's not that I don't want to do it, it's that I want to do it. I just need to go about it a different way or get a different level of support.
Yeah.
And something that we often see in HR is that leaders, they genuinely want to support their people, right? But sometimes they're working off of assumptions because
Right.
they don't know how to go about these, like, how do I address it without offending someone? So, Jenica, what are some of the most common kind of misconceptions organizations still have about neurodivergent employees?
Yeah, I think a really big one that I'm noticing when I speak to people that have like medium to large businesses is the expectation that everyone is medicated. In my kind of experience with my clients, that is not really a question that comes up. I say, hey, if you want to divulge, you're more than welcome to. But not everyone is medicated. And I think that's such a big misconception, because there are people that are going to thrive better off medication than they would because they feel so much differently. I started being on medication in the eighth grade, and for a long time, I was very much in my teenage rebellion phase of my life where I didn't want to take it because I didn't want to be different. But I also think that working with medical professionals and saying, hey, this is how I feel, how do we want to approach this? A lot of people still have that shame, that guilt. But how do we move forward? How do we really sit and have these conversations if maybe your brain isn't working at the capacity that it should be? I think another misconception is it that ADHD neurodivergence is it puts a bigger weight on your support team, on your team in general, and in the workplace. I actually don't think that that's true, because there's so many people that have shown that if you actually support them, if you build systems, if you actually listen to your employees, more than likely you're going to get a better outcome versus not listening to actual feedback, not taking, constructive criticism, and really sitting in some of those feelings, because it is hard. And as you both know, being in HR, it is its own monster, for good and for bad, because we also have to be so agile and so focused on what is going on in the world, not only in our businesses, but also externally as well. And so I really love being an educator on that, because I think if we don't educate, then the stigma only continues. We feel that shame, we feel that guilt. And that's not what I would want for my clients, for myself. And that's something that you have to work on every single day.
And what I think is fantastic about you, Jenica, in particular, which is why we invited you on here, is that you understand the bridge between what employees are trying to say and what leadership needs to hear. And somewhere it sort of breaks down. So for me, the misconception within like leadership organizations is that the bridge is not there. Sometimes it's missing. They don't have an HR department, or their HR department is not aware, or they're just not focusing on it and providing those solutions or creating that bridge. So I love what you just said about like this sort of like role that you play within these organizations in the education piece, because there's so much more that you can get out of your employees. And when you were saying about the like non-medicated versus medicated, like we know so many people in our lives personally and professionally that are on both. Either, they are getting sort of a chemical addition to their life, and they have to sort of adjust, or they're not, and they still have to adjust to the environment. So there's a lot of adjusting, a lot of shifting, and like you said, a lot of education that's necessary. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I think for me too, it's hard because I was diagnosed at an early age, and I'm seeing a lot of people, mainly women, that are being diagnosed later in life,
Mhm.
and they're really
Yeah.
understanding why they're thinking the way that they are. They're not crazy. It's our brains are literally wired differently. And I
Mhm.
kind of love the simple, one of the mindsets that I really love to do is like the like square breathing or like the 4 count breathing, because it's something that is so simple, so easy, or even going and drinking water and sitting outside for 5 minutes, that we sometimes forget to actually take a step away from our work, from overall life. And something as simple as that can really change your own perspective and how you make your own business decisions as well.
But we've talked about how HR often ends up playing a big role in how to help guide people at work. Jenica, from your perspective, what role should HR play in helping create a more inclusive environment?
I believe that, having the modes of communication is super vital. If you don't have clear communication channels, people are more than likely not going to want to have those conversations because they don't know who to talk to, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. I am so glad that we have different types of policies and laws in the US that we are able to have those conversations. I also just think having governance, having systems that actually help both HR and the employee as well is super important. So having, basic training about how to have these conversations, having correct language so that we're not just going back to the negativity side of things. I think a good thing too is I am a big proponent of reading nonfiction books. I've read a couple lately, mainly the bullet journal, that has really helped me better understand how I even write my own notes. So I always have my little notebook handy and ready to go because you never know when things are going to pop in my brain. But I think being there and also making sure that leadership is aware of what's going on and what is trending, and especially in the workplace, things can change so rapidly. So making sure that leadership is aware, they also have a chance to be honest with their employees as well. But I also understand that within leadership as well, there may be extra training that might be involved in that as well. But taking that as a positive, as a gain for not only themselves, but for the business as well, is something that is going to pay them back dividends in the future and in the current as well.
You were talking about how HR can support sort of the conversations moving and creating more of an inclusive environment. We go back to that leadership. HR could be so well intentioned and so well versed and pretty well educated in how to handle, ADA and sort of some of the laws and the accommodations that people make, or even handling accommodations on their own. And then it comes down to like leadership and the way they communicate or the way that they kind of handle these kind of moments is so key, because there's also some groups that we have seen or work with that also don't understand disclosure either. And sometimes they will highlight something that they've accommodated or that they've had worked with someone on, and it creates a bigger situation that doesn't need to be created. And so I think HR's role and leadership role is to also understand that confidentiality around it while also providing resources and showcasing that they are flexible in this way. It can be tough, right, to do both.
Uh, from what I kind of experienced in the corporate space is that was a lot of my own experience, right? Where there wasn't a lot of support, even though, yeah, I was at Microsoft, I was at these big companies, but that was, 5, 10 years ago, and things have changed so drastically. But continuing to have those honest conversations, and especially with leadership, that if they feel like they don't have enough of that muscle to have those conversations, how do we lead them? Do we give them more training? Do we give them reading resources? Do we bring in an outside consultant that says, hey, this is what this looks like? How do you want this to be a better experience, not only for your managers, for your employees, but the overall business as a whole? Because you can highlight so many things, but at the end of the day, if people don't feel safe in their work environment, they're probably not going to produce as effective work versus if they feel safe, if they feel supported,
Right.
if they feel like they can actually have those harder conversations with their managers, with their leadership. Because at the end of the day, leaders are leaders. They have to lead, they have to show by example. And if their leaders aren't doing that, then there's already that break in trust there.
So another concern that we hear from managers is around balance, right? So like managers want to support their teams, but also maintain clear expectations across, their team. So, how can leaders support neurodivergent employees while still maintaining performance expectations for the whole team?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like I said, having those harder conversations for me, I really believe in really being clear and having clarity about how you work best. I know for me, because I do work from home, I know that that's going to be the best environment for me. I know that there are a bunch of other people that have ADHD that are neurodivergent that they actually love being in the office because it gives them that dopamine, that chaos kind of helps them throughout their day, and they get to meet, people. They get to actually sit and have real conversations in person. But I think it's hard too because you don't want to overstep your boundaries. You also want to make sure that you remain, you have those privacy conversations. But I don't think that anyone should feel the shame, the guilt of that, because we're all humans. We're all learning. This is our first time on Earth. And so really understanding that every journey is going to be a little bit different for every single person. But if you have the right language, and yeah, people are going to make mistakes, but if you show ownership, if you show accountability, that hey, I didn't know that that was a part of the policy, or I didn't know that that could be a part of a accommodation. Sometimes people just need to kind of be led to that last 10% to get to that end line. And a great example of that is when I did have more accommodations, one of them was that I had a larger screen on my laptop than most people did because I'm also legally blind. And so, really understanding the ecosystem of ADA and kind of what you can actually ask for. I think a lot of people do feel fearful when they ask for something because they don't want to get a slap on the wrist. But at the end of the day, if it helps you do better work, why not ask for it? And the worst that they can say is no, but at least they know that you're actually thinking about something that is two steps ahead.
Exactly. We train managers on how to have those conversations and how to bring them back to HR so that we can be fair and consistent across the board in organizations to make sure that we are supporting the way that we do. And so, great solution for anything that you bring to the table. And also, like I said, like it encourages, if you even share your story with other people in your organization, they'll say, "Hey, why'd you get a bigger laptop?" Then it gives you an opportunity to educate and share, but also give someone the strength and the opportunity to say, I didn't know we can do that. First, it starts to see the company in a different light. And two, it says, I need the same thing or I need something similar. And they can kind of go through the motions as well.
What are some common mistakes that companies make when they attempt to create a neurodiverse friendly environment?
Number one, right off the bat, is spending too much money on platforms or apps that aren't actually useful. That kind of goes back to the comment that I made about actually listening to feedback. Most people don't want to learn two, three, four new platforms just to do their jobs more effectively. So I always talk about like making things simple. It doesn't have to be, one app does everything, but also thinking about the efficiency of how people can learn something on the fly and then move forward. Does it look like maybe more training? Maybe it looks like more demos. I think another thing that I see a lot is staying in the digital world when sometimes having these harder conversations are better in person. I know that that's not um, going to happen across the board, but especially in these more deeper conversations, being able to have the ability to actually talk to someone face to face and being honest and being upfront about it. I think the final misconception that I really notice is not being open enough to think about how it could affect the business, right? For me, I know how I work best. And so that's how my workflow is set up. I usually kind of audit it every quarter. If I think that something's no longer working for me, then I'm like, okay, how do we really sit down and how do we move forward? I think these are all learning experiences. And we should be very vocal about how we feel about these experiences because if we don't talk about it, it's just going to continue to kind of be something that we push down and put in a cave instead of educating other people. And education is hard. But if we don't educate, then there's going to continue to be the stigmas, the misconceptions,
Right.
when we can have better conversations than that.
Oh, exactly. And anyone who's listening right now, may they be an HR leader or a manager or even the business owner or leadership, like senior leadership, they're probably saying to themselves, like, this is all important information. This is all things that I need to be doing and I need to be working on. And if you had to pick one step that companies can take literally tomorrow to begin being more intentional and more supportive, what would that be?
Honestly, creating either like a playbook or some simple guide that kind of gets the ball rolling. I know that that's kind of a like cliche term, but I think having that first step be the beginning of, hey, this is what we want our employees to experience. How do we get them across that finish line? And it's like, hey, you kind of use a scientific method and you say, what are we trying to gain out of this? What are we questioning? And then actually go through those steps and think about that process rather than, going to the first book that you want to read or going to the first podcast or going to someone that may not have all of the knowledge or experience. Because in that way, you can always change, you can modify, you can add that playbook. But at the same time, you know that you're not just starting from zero. You can bring in other people, you can have different conversations, but having it be on paper is a great starting point because if you don't have that in front of you, then you have nowhere to start and nowhere to go from.
All right. So, Jenica, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on such an important topic. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners find you and connect with you if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I think my at is just Jenica G. Norris. My website is strategicsoundconsulting.com. I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook and TikTok. TikTok, not as much. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm still trying to figure out TikTok from a business perspective. But yeah, I also have some resources on my website as well that people can look into. And then I also pretty much every single day on LinkedIn do another tip, do another conversation along the lines of neurodivergence and how it does apply in business. But that's where you can find me. And I love to support other people and really help them understand how we can use our neurodivergence for success in business.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So before we wrap up, we always like to end each episode with a little tea with HRT tradition. So we kind of go around and share what we have in our mugs today. So Eileen, what do you have in your mug today?
Self-care. I am doing sparkling water. Just got myself my first soda stream. So I have my wine glass with sparkling water and ice.
And Jenica, what do you have today?
I have a Diet Dr. Pepper. I call it my dopamine drink. I love a good espresso in the morning, but I need the bubbles in the afternoon. And so I love my Diet Dr. Pepper.
Awesome. And today I've got my coconut water. So we're all trying to be hydrated today. All right, everyone, let's cheers to a more thoughtful and inclusive workplace. Cheers. Thanks for joining us on Tea with HRT. We hope you got some laughs, some insights, and maybe even a few things you can actually use. If you like this episode, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell a friend. Find us on social media. Links are all in the description. And let us know what you think or what you want to hear more about at tea@hrtransform.com. Catch you next time on Tea with HRT.